Thank you for the kind introduction. And first of all, I would also like to thank each and every one of you for sparing your valuable time and listening to me. So topic for today's presentation is intermediary services under GST. And some of you would know that intermediary services since the beginning of GST has been a point of contention between the department and the assessee. And I may not be very far from the truth if I would say that intermediary, in fact, services are in fact the most contended services between the taxpayers and the department. So in this short presentation, my endeavor would be to familiarize everyone with what is this concept of intermediary services and what makes it so contentious. And we will also discuss a few advanced rulings and judicial precedents in this regard. So let me begin with the concept of intermediary from a layman's point of view. So what is an intermediary? Simply speaking, intermediary is in fact a link between a service provider and service recipient. So what happens generally is the economy has become very global in a digital age. So a company which is situated in US or a Singapore or London may want to have the clients and relationships all across the world, including India. But they may not have a physical presence or office in those countries. And therefore, what they do is they generally appoint an intermediary to maintain those client relationships and to increase their sales and presence in those areas. So some of the operations which a typical intermediary will perform is like the customers acquisitions. So they may actually search for customers in that geography. They may do marketing support. They can do after sales support. And there are some other activities which a intermediary will perform, like facilitation of services, backend support, etc. This normally becomes a point of contention as to, given the definition of intermediary services under GST, what in fact would qualify as, or what in this gamut of services, what exactly would qualify as intermediary service. So this is the basic concept of intermediary. Now, before I delve into what is intermediary service under GST or what makes it so contentious, let's step down a little bit to the service tax regime. So before 2012, there was no concept of intermediary under service tax. Now, what used to happen was, or there were a number of disputes before the tribunal. So I will just explain a typical scenario. So one of the scenario was a company A sitting in Singapore is selling some goods in India. The customer is in India. So physically the goods as well as the customer is in India. The company in Singapore does not have any representatives in India to do after sales support or give any kinds of services in relation to those goods in India. So the Singapore entity has appointed an agent in India. Now this agent does all the services in relation to that goods. So the dispute arose that the agent in India said that all of my services are getting exported because I am being paid by the Singapore agency. So the recipient of the services is sitting in Singapore. This is a typical case of export. But the case of the department was a very nuanced one. The department said, look, this is not an ordinary service. Here, everything is getting consumed in India. The actual recipient of service, that is the person who is having the goods in his possession or who's bought the goods, is in India. So typically, and so the consumption is in India, recipient is in India, and supplier is in India. So the department's case was, how can that be a export transaction? But fortunately or unfortunately, the tribunal in those cases did not agree with the case of the department, and they said that, look, the privity of contract, so that means the contractual relationship is between the Singapore entity and the Indian entity. And since the recipient is located outside India, in this case, which is Singapore, the services will amount to an exporter service. Now, this became a point of contention in hundreds of cases, which have now traveled to Supreme Court, but there is no finality on those cases. The government, in the meantime, decided to introduce this concept of intermediary services in the statute book. Now, the effect of intermediary services is that the government or the department is saying that in case the services are intermediary services, we will not see where the recipient of service is located. We will just see where the supplier of service is located. So if the agent is in India, the agent or intermediary is in India, we will deem that the services are not exported, but services are performed in India. So this concept was introduced in the year 2012. And in the year 2012, it was first introduced in relation to services. But in relation to goods, in the year 2014, it got substantially expanded. And even in relation to goods, the concept of intermediary was introduced. So this was the entire background which makes it so intermediary service, which makes the intermediary services so unique. Now, moving forward, so let us try and understand whether anything has changed from pre-GST scenario to post-GST scenario. And so this is the definition of intermediary on your screen. So if you see on the left side of screen, and the definition which was there in the pre-GST scenario is given. And on the right side of your screen, post-GST scenario definition has been given. You would notice that almost the entire definition is same. Only difference here is that in the case of post-GST scenario, the department has also included the securities in the intermediary in relation to securities within this ambit. So therefore, the entire concept seems to have been borrowed from pre-GST era. And therefore, the reason for pointing out this nuance here is that whatever are the judicial precedents which would be in relation to pre-GST era should ideally apply to post-GST also, because this concept is almost the same. We will also discuss a department clarification in the later part of this presentation, wherein the department has also confirmed this understanding that both pre-GST and post-GST, the concept remains the same. So this, now let's come to the definition for some time. Let's spend some time on this. So if you see on this definition from the screen on the right side of your screen, the definition has multiple elements. So the first part of the definition, you will see intermediary refers to a broker, an agent, or any other person by whatever name called. So this is an essential part of the definition. So first we have to see whether the intermediary is a broker, an agent, or any other person. And the legislature has also, in its wisdom, has also written by whatever name called. So the implication of this word is that in the contractual relationship or in the agreement, the parties may define this person by any name, but as long as the relationship is between two parties as a broker or an agent, the nomenclature in the agreement will become irrelevant or redundant. The only thing which is relevant to be seen is that whether the other party is a broker or an agent. So this is the first part of the definition. Second part of the definition is the person should arrange or facilitate the supply of goods or services. So as we had discussed in the layman terms, so the important part would be that the agent or the intermediary is arranging or facilitating the services between two or more persons. So here there are two important parts. So one is the person should arrange or facilitate. We will discuss the meaning of these terms in a later paragraph as to what is the extent of these terms. But another crucial thing to be pointed out here is that it should be between two or more persons. So there are two persons who are providing services to each other, and there's a facilitator, which is the intermediary. So what is presupposed here is that in a typical intermediary scenario, there would be typically three parties. So it would be a tripartite or three parties arrangement here. Now I'll come to the last part of the definition, but that does not include a person who supplies goods or services or both on his own account. So this part of the definition is equally crucial, wherein if a person is not providing these services on behalf of another person, but it is only providing services on its own account as an independent person, then that person will not amount to intermediary. So we have discussed three parts. First is what is the nature of an intermediary. So you will have to remember or understand that an intermediary is essentially a broker or an agent. Second, it has to be three parties. Third, the person should also be arranging and facilitating the services. And fourth, he should work on someone's behalf. He should not be an independent person. So these are the elements of intermediary. Now let's deep dive. So we have already discussed that intermediary is a person who arranges or facilitates the provision of a service. Now this service between two persons is referred to as main service. Let me just get back to the previous definition, previous slide. So if you see on the left side of your screen, pre-GST scenario, it used to say a provision of a service, and in the bracket, if you notice, it says hereinafter called the main service. So therefore, the job of an intermediary, a typical intermediary, is to facilitate this main service or the principal service between two or more people. So, looking at this entire thing holistically, there has to be, a conclusion can be drawn is that there are two streams of services. One is a supply between the principal party, which is the supplier of service, to a third party, and another stream of service is between the intermediary and the principal. So therefore, first is arrangement and facilitation of service, and the second is there has to be two supplies. Now, coming as to what this fourth element, which is that intermediary cannot alter the nature of or value of service. This has come out from a lot of judicial precedents, but this also flows from the definition because it says that it has to be on behalf of some party. So therefore, an intermediary is only a facilitator. He cannot change the nature or scope or value of the services. So this is the fourth requirement. Second, another test of intermediary is that consideration for that intermediary service should be separately identifiable. So let's say the service amount charged from the customer is 100 and the intermediary is being paid 10. So both these consideration has to be separately identifiable. It should not be that there is a consolidated amount and between the agency and the principal, there is no privity of contract. So basically, the consideration for the intermediary service has to be a separate arrangement. Then one of the most crucial tests is the intermediary satisfying the test of an agency, whether he is acting as an agent or he is acting as a principal. So if he's satisfying the agency test, he will qualify as an intermediary. If he's not qualifying as an agent, then he will not qualify as an intermediary. Now, last element, which is also very crucial, is typically, this is a typical scenario wherein the payment of generally a typical intermediary commission or the consideration would be dependent on the amount of sale or the amount of services it facilitates between two parties. So therefore, what typically is understood is that the intermediary is entitled to an agency commission, and therefore the nature of payment should also be by way of a commission. We will discuss these concepts in a later paragraph, and we will discuss some of the judicial precedents. Now, coming back to what is the effect of intermediary? So we have briefly discussed this, but what you need to understand is why this becomes so crucial is that if the recipient, if the classification of service is not in the nature of intermediary, the arrangement will qualify as an export of service. But if it is in the nature of intermediary, as per section 13(8), which you will see on the third bullet, it says that place of supply for the intermediary services shall be the location of supplier. So if the intermediary is located in India, no matter where the recipient of service is located, the services will not qualify as an export of service. And therefore, it becomes crucial in a number of scenarios to identify whether the services as a whole would qualify as intermediary services or not. So let's and go back to the definition wherein we so if you see the definition again, the first part of the definition was that the first element of the definition is that he should be in the nature of a broker or an agent. So let's discuss as to what is a broker or an agent. So the term broker or an agent is not defined under GST. So this is the first thing which you have to remember, that the definition is not there. So it is a classic rule of interpretation is that when something is not defined under the statute, you will have to give the ordinary meaning to that term. So from the ordinary, normally this ordinary meaning has to be found either in the dictionary or how it is commonly understood in the general parlance. So what I have tried to do here is I have tried to incorporate a few definitions which could be useful to gauge as to what is this concept of agent. So first is the Black's Law Dictionary. So Black's Law Dictionary has multiple definitions of an agent or a broker, but the most important definition which I have incorporated in this slide is an agent is a person who acts as an intermediary or negotiator between prospective buyers and sellers. So the typical job of an intermediary is to negotiate or to negotiate a contract between the buyers and the sellers. A much wider definition is given under the Indian Contract Act. Under Indian Contract Act, there is a separate chapter which talks about the law of agency. And under section 182, contract law defines that an agent is a person who is employed to do any act for another or to represent another in dealing with a third person. So this is in fact the most useful definition of an intermediary. So what typically happens is an agent is someone who works on behalf of the principal. So typically, let's take an example of an employee. So employee, in case of employee, it is presumed that employees' acts are the acts of the employer. So in that case, employees become the agents of the main part, the employer. So ultimately, the test is that he should be representing the principal in the dealing of the third persons. So the entire concept of agency hinges on this concept, where as to whether the person is acting independently or he is acting on behalf of another person. So this is the most important concept which is coming out from the Contract Act, and which is what is more relevant. Before the introduction of GST, as we had discussed, under Service Tax Education Guide, there is some more guidance on this concept of agency or intermediary. So therefore, so under Service Education Guide, the following elements have been identified. So first is obviously because the person is representing the principal in its dealing with a third party. So therefore, again, we will come back to the same thing, that it has to be a tripartite agreement. Second, there should be an arrangement or facilitation of service between the two parties. Third, because he is representing someone else, he is not independent. Therefore, he is not providing services on his own account. So this is the third element. Fourth, again, we discussed this, that because it is not his own independent service, he is not adding anything independently in that contract. So therefore, he is basically a pass-through entity, or he is just a facilitator, which is just acting on behalf of someone. So again, it is an important element that he is not altering the nature of the services. Then agent supply is distinguishable from main supply. So it should be such that the agent's value or agent services should be identifiable separately. Then the last part is not important because it was in relation to the goods only, services only. So therefore, the commission agent was not included at that time. But now under GST, this is no more relevant. Now coming to the most important part. So under GST, the department has issued a circular, a very comprehensive circular in 2021, wherein the concept of intermediary has been explained in detail. This circular is helpful in certain situations, but I will also add that the circular is equally vague in describing a few situations. So we will first see as to what circular actually provides. So some of these elements we've already discussed. So I will just very quickly just recap everything. So circular's understanding is similar to what is the normal understanding of an intermediary. So minimum of 3 parties, which we've already discussed. There has to be 2 distinct supplies, one between the agent and the principal, and one between the principal and the third party. So this is also very clear. Third is the intermediary should have the character of an agent. So that means, again, we will go back to the same situation, that he should not be an independent party. He should be acting in someone else's behalf. And then he should not be doing on his own account. He should be doing on someone else's account. And fifth, clarification, which is the most crucial, is if you subcontract a part of the activity. So let's say you have a contract to provide A, B, C. There are 3 bundled services which you have to provide. And let's say a person subcontracts the part C or a part of that service, a separately identifiable part, then that would not amount to be intermediary services. Now, the department circular has 4 examples, 4 illustrations to bring home these concepts, and let us discuss each example one by one. So first example is a very typical plain vanilla example of intermediary. So if you see on the diagram on the right side, there is a manufacturer of a machine. Let's say he is located in UK. He wants to sell machines in India. So for this purpose, he has engaged an intermediary, which is called C. Intermediary will identify a client in India, B, and then it will negotiate the terms of the agreement. He will finalize the sale on behalf of A. He will get his commission for supplying these services. So this is, in this case, the department circular is saying that this party C, which is an intermediary or agent of A, is facilitating the supply of machinery between party A, which is the principal manufacturer, and B, which is the final client. So this is the most plain vanilla concept wherein, a typical intermediary is there, and the circular has correctly identified it to be a intermediary services. This is now, let's come to another example, which is on a different, which is on the other end of the spectrum, wherein the example is that A is a software manufacturer, which is, again, let's say he's located in US. He has so he has customers in India. So if you recall my first example, so let's say A has manufactured this machinery, and or in this example, he has developed some software. He has entered into a contract with the customers for providing a customized software in India. Now, A outsources, so A, the manufacturer of supplier of software, outsources a part of this designing activity to a BPO in India, which is called C. Now, C will design the software and he will supply it to A. And then A will consolidate, after designing the software, after completing all the activities, will supply the customized software to customer C in India. What you would notice here is, in this diagram at least, is that the party B, which is the supplier of services to A, has no contact with customer C. So therefore, he has no role in facilitating the services. He is just doing his own service on principal to principal basis with A. So therefore, he is not dealing with any other party other than A. There is no contact between B and C. And therefore, in the circular, it has been correctly clarified that this is an activity which is a standalone activity between A and B, which will not qualify as an intermediary services. So this is, as I said, illustration 1 and illustration 2 are different end of the spectrum. Now let's come to some of the more contentious issues. So here, again, it is an example which is being given, illustration which is given by the department only, and which I find to be may not lay down to be the correct position of law, but for whatever worth it is, let's discuss this. So in this example, you will notice on the right side, P is an insurance company, which is arranging, which is, which is an insurance company. So that typically means that he has given insurance to a number of parties across the globe, including India. The insurance company wants help of a person in India for processing the insurance claims. So in this example, it has appointed a company called Q. Now, the Q's role is that it has to take the insurance claim and it has to process the insurance claim and then relay all the information to P, so that the P company will take a call whether it has to reimburse or make good these insurance claim, or it has to reject the insurance claim. For doing all this activity, for verifying, for processing everything, this Q company charges 1% of the insurance claim which it receives. Now, in this case, the department has clarified that this is also an example of an intermediary service. But here I beg to differ from the CBIC, because in this case, it is my view that here also the intermediary is an independent person. It is not facilitating any supply between P and R. Q is independently providing a service to P, and it has no role in facilitation between P and R. Again, in this case, there is no, as such, the Q is not linking, which is between, P and R. And therefore, in my opinion, it would not amount to an intermediary, but the department in its own wisdom has clarified this service to be an intermediary. So this is where things get complicated as to, in this typical scenario, whether Q, which is an intermediary, whether it is facilitating the service between P and R, or it is providing an independent service to P, irrespective of what R does. Then another example which has been given in the circular is, again, A is a manufacturer or supplier of a software. This person, this requires a BPO in India for customers in India. And therefore, for any queries to the customers, etc., this task has been assigned to a BPO, which is called Business Process Outsourcing in India. So in this case, the BPO will again interact with the customers. It will solve all the queries. And therefore, in this example also, the what has been clarified by the department is that it is a part of, so A has to do a lot of activities with the customers, but since the customer care activity has been assigned to a BPO, this is an example wherein the BPO is providing a service on a standalone basis to A and is not facilitating those services. In this case also, the department has clarified that it would not amount to an intermediary service. So these are the 4 illustrations which the department has laid down to clarify the scope of an intermediary. So let's just go to a few precedents in this regard. So in this next part of the presentation, what I will do is I will also refer to a lot of service tax judgments, which is pre-GST scenario, because these precedents are equally important in understanding the post-GST scenario, because we have discussed that the definitions of intermediary service or the concept has remained the same. So going forward, first we'll discuss the advanced ruling in the case of GoDaddy. So what you have to remember is that this advanced ruling was also given in the pre-GST era. And in fact, GoDaddy advanced ruling is one of the first rulings on the issue of intermediary. So in this case, what was happening was that the taxpayer, which is GoDaddy India, was providing various services to their parent company in US. So what were those services? So they was providing marketing services, the customer support services, and also they were processing the payments of Indian customers for GoDaddy US. So all these services were provided to GoDaddy US. They were also not concerned with the GoDaddy's actual services to the customers in India, which were web hosting, domain name registration, design services. So they had no control over those activities or no interference in those activities. The department's case in this case was very interesting. So the department in this case had contended that if you look at these services as a bundle or as a whole, all these services, marketing, customer support, processing of payment, this go in a long way. This go in a long way in facilitating the services between GoDaddy US and the customers in India, and therefore this should typically be an intermediary service. But thankfully, the Advanced Ruling Authority in that case rejected the arguments of the department, and they said that the activities here are on principal-to-principal basis between India and US. The entire objective is to promote the services and not the facilitation of services, then one of the important planks of this judgment was that the services were never rendered on behalf of GoDaddy US, but the services were rendered directly to GoDaddy US, and therefore this will not amount to an intermediate service. And ultimately, the Advanced Billing Authority reached to a conclusion that these services were in the nature of support services and would not amount to an intermediary service. Now let's come to another judgment, which is also interesting judgment. So in this case, Verizon India Private Limited. So this is a judgment by CSTAT. In this case, what is happening is that the company was providing a lot of services. Again, a bundle of services were performed on behalf of its parent outside India. So they were providing telecommunication services, market research services. They were also identifying the customers. They were doing the billing and administrative support. And the most crucial part, which became the most important plank of the argument of the department, was that in this case, the plank of the appellant was that in this case, the amount was that the way it was charged from the US and or their parent entity was that they were recovering all the costs in India with a markup of 11%. So they were not charging in relation to the billing which has been done or the customers which have been acquired in India. So again, department's case was that by performing market research, by identifying the customers, by doing the billing, what effectively Verizon India is doing is they are facilitating the services of Verizon UK and their Indian customers, and which is typically what be an understanding of intermediary. But tribunal again in this judgment has said that hold on, there is no, we have seen that there has to be three parties here. The tribunal in this case noted that these are services, but where is the third party? They are not doing any of these services to any of the customers in India. They have no contact except for the billing, but they are not doing any services for Verizon UK to customers in India. And therefore they said in this entire gamut of services, we see only two parties, Verizon UK and Verizon India, and therefore it will not amount to intermediary service. So in this case, the tribunal has laid down that in order to facilitate, there has to be three parties. So in case there are no three parties, it will not amount to intermediary service. Now moving to another judgment of Chevron Chemical. This is actually a very complicated case in that sense, because this case is bordering between a classic case of intermediary and a case wherein it can be argued that there is no intermediary. So this case was basically in a twilight zone between an intermediary and not intermediary. So let's understand what were the facts in this case. So here in this case, there was a sales promotion and an agency agreement. What you need to know is, what you need to notice here is that the agreement itself says that it is an agency agreement. And the activity, if you see, the agent in India, which was Chevron Phillips Chemical in India, is liable or is under the agreement is instructed to promote the services of overseas entity in respect of various chemical products in India. And another important point here to note here is that the agent is liable to get a commission, and the commission is also fixed on the basis of how much amount is billed in India. So in this case also, what you see is that a lot of elements of intermediary service which we have discussed, that he has to be an agent. In this case, it is satisfied that it is an agent. Second, the commission, he should get commission based on the invoice price. Here also, this condition has also been satisfied in this case. And therefore, most of the criteria which makes a party a typical intermediary was satisfied in this case. But having said that, what the company argued was that, look, here I am doing sales promotion, I am an agent, which is clear, but I have no role in interaction with the third party. So how did it prove? It says that I have no role in fixation of party. What I am doing is I am just promoting the sale. I am not executing the sale. So this, and then they also said that I do not interact with any other clients. I just promote the sale. So I just do the advertising. I just do sales promotion. Then I have no role whether the contract is executed between the parties or not. And in this case also, thankfully, the tribunal agreed, and it was held that these kinds of services will not amount to intermediary services. Now, next, we will see the ruling of VServe Private Limited. So this, now we are just have this is the first ruling which we are discussing, which relates to post GST implementation period. And VServe Global advanced ruling is actually one of the most contentious or most criticized advanced rulings which have been pronounced. So let me first describe as to what was the activity in this case. So under the agreement, VServe Global was to provide a number of back office support services. So on the left side of your screen, what you will see is a gamut of activities which were performed by VServe Global. So there is a creation of purchase order, there is dispatch of sale related documents, licensing with the agents in India, then supplying the cargo readiness, then processing the payment request. Then they are also processing the payrolls of the company in India. But most importantly, what you need to note here is that the potential customers are not identified by them. So the Indian agent or the VServe Global in India were not identifying any potential customer. They have no role in purchase and sale order finalized by the client. And the most important aspect here is that VServe Global will come into picture only after the sale is finalized. So once the sale is finalized, then only they will enter into purchase orders, payroll processing, processing payment request, everything. So VServe Global argued that I am doing some back office support services. I am nowhere close to any intermediaries. Having said that, AR ruled that, if we see your services on a whole, if we see, instead of looking each of the services in an individual level, if we see all your services as a whole, this services only adds to the facilitation of service between the foreign party and Indian customers. So ultimately, the advanced ruling was of the view was that the services of the foreign party and the Indian party cannot be undertaken without this back office support. So therefore, you have gone on to arrange or facilitate these services between the two parties. Now, what is also important to note here is that which actually shook the balance against the applicant or VServe Global in this case, because the remuneration was based on the number of purchase and sale transactions held by them. So therefore, the court, the advanced ruling authority said that the remuneration, we see your remuneration, and this is directly linked with the purchase and sale transactions handled by you. And therefore, what we feel is that there is a commission angle involved here. And accordingly, what you are doing is you are just licensing between the the customers and the supplier, and which will go on to facilitate the service. So ultimately, in this case, what Advancing Authority is saying is that the scope of arranges or facilitate is much more than just securing the order. Even if you do any ancillary activity, which go on to facilitate the service between the two parties, it will amount to an intermediary service. Now, as I said, that this ruling is one of the contentious one, and there is a lot of there is a lot of dissent against this ruling. So, but it is important to know that such kind of ruling does exist. So the message from this ruling ultimately is that the typical understanding of an intermediary is that he should bring two parties closer. It should facilitate the transaction between the parties. But advanced ruling has made it clear that we can't read that in that sense. And advanced ruling is saying that the arrangement of facilitation, the words which are used in the definition, are much wider, and it will partake the color of arrangement and facilitation, even if there are some back-end support services or some ancillary activities. Now, again, there is also one more interesting judgment, which also very interesting to note, for one aspect, that because under pre-GST, the tribunals have ruled it in a different manner on the same subject, and after GST, the advanced rulings are saying something else. So let me just first come to the facts of this case. So in this case, the company was providing services to banks, colleges, and universities. And the role of the company is that they are promoting the business of the colleges by introducing the aspirant students to them. So what typically happens is that there are a lot of agencies in India which if a person has to wants to do higher education in UK or US, they will give you the options of universities, and they will also contact the universities. They will fill out all the forms, formalities, etc. And then they will, in that sense, they will help the students to take the admission in a foreign university outside India. For these services, the company will get the commission or fee from the college or university abroad based on the students which they recruit for them. This matter reached to the tribunal, and in the tribunal, the department said that, look, this is a case of a pure play intermediary, wherein this company is promoting the services of the foreign university, and therefore the export benefit should not be given. However, the tribunal in this case also rejected the case of the department, saying that what they are doing is not doing on behalf of anyone. It is the main service of the company, and they are doing it on their own. And therefore, they are just arranging, they may be arranging or supplying the students, supplying the services of the universities to students, but they are not doing it on behalf of anyone. They are doing as a standalone activity, and for this standalone activity, they are getting remunerated. And therefore, on this reasoning, the tribunal in the pre-GST era held that these services will not amount to an intermediary service, and therefore the export benefit will be given. But what is surprising to note here is that under the GST regime, when the same thing was argued before an advanced ruling authority, the GST advanced ruling authority, the advanced ruling authority has come to a diametrically opposite conclusion, wherein what they are saying that these services will amount to an activity of intermediary, because they said that the promotion, marketing of various courses of foreign universities to prospective students does not constitute export of service, and they are saying that this is in the nature of intermediary service. So therefore, what this is a classic case wherein the service tax authorities of the tribunal has taken a different view on the same point, and the GST authorities are taking very different point of view. Although we have discussed that there is actually no difference between the two concepts. Okay. Now, let us come to another interesting advanced ruling in the case of Airbus India. So a lot of you would know that Airbus India is actually a company which manufactures aircraft and aircraft parts. Now, for manufacturing the aircraft, and it's a French company, so France-based company. So for manufacturing the parts, manufacturing the planes or aircrafts, they require a number of parts from all across the globe. So what Airbus does is they have appointed global sourcing team to source different parts and products from international markets. So, if a part is there, if it is cheaper in India than China, then they will procure it from India. But so a lot of technicalities remains. So who is the best supplier? So for that, what they do is they have appointed Airbus India for doing this purpose, this procurement for them. So for this purpose, what they've done is they have entered into an intra-group service agreement, wherein the Indian entity will help Airbus outside India in this procurement operation. So procurement operations would mean that, rendering technical advice, business supports, and, identifying that, okay, whether this supplier in India is actually good for these services or good for these products which it is supplying. And then also, obviously, securing the order. In this case, also, the Indian company was not paid any commission. The Indian company was only getting the cost plus markup, which we have discussed in the earlier slides. So in this case, whatever is the cost of Indian entity, that they will recover for this activity, and they will also recover a markup on arm's length basis. So again, the question arose as to whether these activities of Airbus India will amount to an intermediary service or not. In this case also, unfortunately, the Advancement Authority in GST has taken a view that this service is indeed a service which is in relation to an intermediary service. So what is basically held is that, they are not, Airbus India is not doing any activity on their own. They are not selling any goods on their own. They are only arranging a contract. So this is a scenario which is a reverse scenario. So typically an intermediary is engaged for facilitating your supply to a client. But here it is a reverse scenario wherein the supplier's activity or the principal has been facilitated to secure the product from India. So it is a buying commission, not a selling commission. So in this case, what is the Advancement Authority is saying that they are only arranging the supply between the Indian supplier and the customer abroad, and therefore this will fall within the service of intermediary. And they are saying that because it is not doing the service on its own, which is the last condition of the intermediary service, that the intermediary should not be doing the activities on their own. So the tribunal, the Advancement Authority said that it does not fall within the ambit of the exclusion. So exclusion is that it should not be on their own. So the Advancement Authority is of the view that since it is not doing any activity on its own, and therefore it will amount to an intermediary. So I will just stop here, and so these are some of the scenarios which leaves a lot of room for interpretation as to whether the company is arranging or facilitating, whether it is acting independently or on behalf of some other party, or whether they are changing the character, whether they are doing some addition or they are not doing any addition to that service. So all these activities remain contentious under GST. And in the coming years, after the audits have been completed, a lot of these scenarios, client scenarios will be picked up, and there will be a lot of scope for litigation on the intermediary service. For unfortunately, the circular which has been floated by the CBIC also leaves a lot of room. It does clarify a lot of aspects, but on a lot of aspects, there is a clarity still remaining, like Airbus, which is a typical example wherein there is a lot of scope for debate as to whether this kind of activity is a facilitation of supply, or this is kind of an activity which is which it is doing on its own, which is like a bundle of service, which is independent. So with this, I would like to conclude this presentation, because we have discussed nuances of intermediary service. And in case any of you have any question, you may just send it on the chat window. So let me just see, some of the questions have already come. So N. Kishan has asked, one of my clients have agreed to find any entity who would be able to supply goods as required by the foreign entity. It is pertinent to point out that the buyer and seller on a principal to principal basis. Does that fall under GST intermediary service? So Kishan, this is actually a lot of the answer to this question will depend on a lot of factors, but the way you have described it currently, this does seem to fall under the ambit of intermediary service, because the person is doing nothing but just facilitating the transaction between two parties. Although the saving grace here is that in this case, the what I am able to understand from the limited facts is that your client is not actually negotiating or actually cracking the deal for the other party. So therefore, it will not, I mean, there would be a lot of scope, but ultimately the terms of the agreement has to be viewed very, very carefully based on the our discussion earlier. So there is a doubt here which can be clarified after reading the agreement or reading the understanding between the parties. Okay, someone said agent has been defined. Okay, agent, I will have to recheck that, but probably the contract of agency has not been defined. Okay, one real case: A is buying bulk SMS for 8 and selling to overseas. If the sale of services is an intermediary. In this case, Sunil, I feel my view is that in this case, buying of SMS and selling it to overseas customer will not amount to intermediary service, because this is a typical activity which is done on its own. So it's not a facilitation of service. I am buying and I am selling it. So therefore, it will not amount to an intermediary service. Will investment banking services, so Jagdish has asked whether investment banking services provided from India between a buyer and seller will be regarded to be an intermediary service. So in this case, my view is that it will not amount to intermediary service, because the investment banking service is a standalone service. But if you're talking about a typical stockbroking service wherein I take commission and I just find buyer to get the unlisted security, in that case, it would amount to an intermediary service. But if it is in the nature of investment banking service, it will not. Parag has a long question. A person in India giving services to foreign located company located outside India without any subsidiary in India. The person in India markets the product of foreign located company to local Indian companies and takes order on behalf of foreign located company. The foreign located company pays commission to the Indian person, order received in India. directly prepared in the name of foreign located company and not in Indian. Parag, this also looks like a typical intermediary service. If they are getting commission for securing these orders, then definitely this will amount to an intermediary service, because by cursory glance of these facts, it seems that the Indian company is getting the commission just for securing the orders in India. Okay, Jay Zaveri has asked, India sells goods to Amazon warehouse USA on sale of approval basis and price is fixed. Further, as soon as B places order on Amazon portal, Amazon charges various fees such as inventory fee, commission, PBA, while remitting the same amount. Whether Amazon would fall under the intermediary services. So, Jay, generally, Amazon services is actually in the nature of intermediary services. But since Amazon in your case, Amazon is located in US, the location of the supplier would be in US, and therefore, even if it amounts to an intermediary, it will not affect you, because the location supplier is outside India, and even if it amounts to intermediary, it will not affect you. Vishal has written, we have a global agreement in US between our parent entity and overseas client, and by virtue of an agreement, we are required to provide various media and advertising services to the clients. Clients has existence in India. However, US clients wants to bill them directly to US. For providing service, we need to approach various media vendors in India who will bill to us, and we have to claim ITC. Vishal, this is an example which will not amount to intermediary, because in this case, your services seems to be very different and seems to be an independent service. So what you are doing is you are doing your independent services to US, and your services are limited to doing advertising, media, etc., and interacting to the media agency. And your service is nothing to do whether actually both US party and India party interact with or has entered into an agreement or not. Your services seems to be an independent service. So in my opinion, it will not amount to intermediary service. However, having said that, we will have to look at the terms of the agreement. Then Manoj has asked, in case of intermediary, the point of service, POS, is the location of supplier, and hence CGST, SGST only, and never ever IGST. Is the understanding correct? No, because in this case, Manoj, it will be an IGST service, because the location of supplier and the recipient is in different states. So the supplier of service is in India and the recipient of service is outside India, and therefore it would be an IGST supply, not CGST plus SGST supply. So I have tried my best to answer all the queries. I hope there are no further queries. Okay, so in case anyone has any further queries, you may kindly reach out to me on my email ID, which I have given at the end of my slide deck. Taxmann team will also circulate the slide deck. So in case you find any queries, any clarification, I would be available. You may reach out to me on LinkedIn. You may reach out to me on my personal email. I would try my best to address each and every query. With this, I will just hand it over to the Taxmann team. And thank you for being such a wonderful audience.